fucking bucket.
We've seen the passion of our fans in the stands, and that's why we've teamed up with Ally to make women's sports more visible than ever.
We're excited. We're going to talk to you guys about something that the three of us all love, which is women's sports.
Yeah.
Yes.
So think about the growth in women's sports. It's been absolutely incredible. Just to kind of set the stage, revenue projected to reach $2.35 billion globally in 2025, which is up 25%. The ROI for women's sports sponsorships growing 50% faster than men's leagues and exceeding all ROIs, yet less than 6% of the Fortune 500 still invest in women's sports. So we got to fix that. So I'm excited to have Cari and Merritt here today, so we can have a little bit of a discussion about women's sports. So let's start with you, Cari, if you don't mind. Why has brand investment in women's sports been so important? And why do you think that's kind of changing the trajectory of what's happening in the space?
Well, first off, I love this new role. Like, I love that she's moderating us, and she is queen of brand investment. So it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
And allow us to be in this conversation. You know better than I do, but I think that women's sports, everything is about your value. I know that you think like how much money you make, how the raise that you get at work. Your value is there, and that's how we can determine how many people our entities are valuing women's sports, is what they are willing to invest in it. Your company has been one of the first investors in women's sports, dedicated, double down, and I appreciate that. And I get to see other outlets starting to follow the trend and realize that the product has always been there. We just needed the platform, we needed the following. And by we, I mean we as women who know that the product is great in sports. I'm sitting next to a former athlete, amazing at what she does.
Thank you, Cari.
And she could probably tell you better than I can how much money she should have made and what she missed out on, and then came back in and realized, when people realized this is what I want to invest in, she knew that was where her value was. And that's why it's so important, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mayor, you obviously, from an athlete perspective and now going into the broadcasting space, there are a lot of people, as I said, less than 6% of the Fortune 500 is still investing in women's sports. If there's somebody in the audience that works for a brand or an agency and their company still isn't in, how should they think about that? Like, really, what's the unique selling point when you think about women's sports?
When I look at women's sports, I truly believe the unique selling point is its fan base. And the fan base sits on a very wide spectrum. So on one end, you have the tried and true, the day one fan. On the other end of that spectrum sits the friend of a friend who got a ticket to a New York Liberty game, a Gotham FC game. Both of these, and then everyone's sprinkled in between, right? But along this spectrum, they are coming into these respective arenas or stadiums to see the product on the field. But they stay for something that is very unique in women's sport, and that is they start to feel safe. They are able to show up as who they are, authentically who they are, and they become loyal, not only to the organization, not only to the player, but to the brands that have signaled that they care about women's sports.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and so when you have this loyalty that is built and you have this fan base that is truly invested in the entire ecosystem that is women's sports, you start to see something that is a win-win for companies. And that is, it's not a one singular transaction. These fans are invested in the potential growth in the future of women's sports. And that is massive. And that is something that you can double down as a company and really buy into, because these fans want to be the change in the future that they see they can make. And that is women's sports having agency and power within the marketplace.
She said, this is such a good point, the fans that sit on two different spectrums, but I also think what brands are realizing, and I don't know if I'm jumping the gun by answering this and following up, but it's the storytelling. If I don't have a character, if I don't have storylines, how can I be invested? If I don't know who the player is, just think about sports in general. You know about the players, the team you fell in love with. When I was a kid, it was the Lakers. And I knew that the Lakers didn't like the Boston Celtics. And so sorry to any Celtics fans. So because I was raised in a Laker household, the storylines were there and I was invested and I knew what brands paid attention and who would ride for the Lakers, et cetera. And that's what people are seeing now. We have great storylines in sports that are getting so much attention. And so the brands also are following the storylines and investing.
Yeah, it's really interesting from a brand perspective. I work for a bank. Most people don't love their banks unless you have an Ally account, right, Julie? Then you love your bank. Go Ally.
Shout out to Julie.
That's right. Julie showed me her Ally app before the panel just to prove it. But we measure favorability and what consumers think about us and their positive sentiment towards us. When we look at our favorability among women's sports fans, it's 30% higher than it is against the general market. And they're opening accounts at 6 times the rate than the general market. So we've got the receipts in terms of what it's done for our business, which is pretty incredible. Cari, think about media investment. It's so important, right? It's like the crux of breaking what I call the vicious cycle. The brands have to come in, they have to make the media investment. You've historically worked for one of the legacy media platforms who are covering women's sports more, but there's also a lot of these kind of burgeoning media platforms, just women's sports, that are starting to pop up and tell stories a little bit differently. Why do you think this full ecosystem is so important in women's sports versus what we see on the men's side?
It's important because up until yesterday, women's sports probably only received about 4% of national coverage. You couldn't find it. So how could I be invested in it? I didn't know who they were. Who were the players? What are their names? We see examples of that all the time. And I think with social media, with the idea that you are your own citizen journalist, die-hard fans, perhaps people who played the sport who couldn't become professional or didn't think being a professional athlete was a venue for them. They start their own blogs, a Substack. They've, together, just women's sports. You talk about it, daily women's sports. It's so many different outlets, and these people who are covering and writing these stories care about it. Here's a story. About how it's important to have these small brands. When I started in the business, I was working at Tennis Channel, and it's a single network, right? A single sport network. And a lot of the women on the tour at the time felt like if you weren't top 10, you weren't getting coverage. Along came a really good friend of mine, shout out to Courtney Nguyen, and she created a blog where she highlighted all of the players on the tour that were 25 and under and told these very unique stories about them. Out of nowhere, she became more popular than some of the players because that's where they could find the information, the real stories, the truth behind it all. And that is so important. And now other outlets have realized that you write on this niche, what people think is niche, but you get these dedicated cult-like fans, which I totally appreciate, and they stay loyal and they invest, much like what you were saying. Yeah. The receipts are there.
Absolutely. Mayor, you and I were talking a little bit about this inside before the panel, and I know you've got a lot of passion around this, but the whole idea of partnerships...
Don't get me started.
Partnerships with athletes and more brands that are signing athletes, why is that important, and what can we do as brands to do a better job of telling the stories and the narratives of athletes, and even what can they do a better job of building their own brands, and why is that so important?
Yeah, Andrea, I think I want to take this question from the evolution of what we've seen from brand investment to answer this question. And I'm going to take you back to 2013 real quick. It's my rookie year in the NWSL, and we had one singular brand sponsor. It was an avocado company. And did we get paid for eating these avocados? No. Were we able to invest in this avocado company? Absolutely not. They did, however, provide a box of avocados once a month, which doubled our salary by far. So
health-wise.
Yeah, I mean, just thank God for this avocado company because we wouldn't have been able to survive. But I tell you this story to bring you to our present day. We're in 2025, and you see such an investment from your traditional, partnerships in Ally Bank and Capital One, and these various brands that have really seen the power of women's sport. I think the really interesting piece that is a signal that women's sport and the athletes that play within it are starting to change the marketplace is that these historic beauty brands or cosmetic brands that have only seen their demographic as this one particular silo group, and we know them, we know how they were pictured or viewed, and in history, they did not see the benefit of the crossover with a professional athlete. You now see Fenty Beauty, you see e.l.f. Cosmetics, you have NYX on the back of Angel City's jerseys, and you start to see that not only are women's professional athletes and the organizations they play for getting the eyes of your traditional markets, but they're doing something different and they're creating a market. This is new. This is something that we haven't seen or athletes haven't been able to have that ability to do, to go to what we've seen traditionally true about women's products and say, you need these women to be a part of it.
Novel idea, women's products supporting women's sports. In my mind, I'm all like, why is this just now the science?
It's
right?
crazy.
Like, it's insane. In the year of 2025, we're just acknowledging that. Or 20, look, but the reality is that's the case. It's a miss in a lot of ways. And I think even storytelling, I think of all of these events that we do and things that we cover, and there are so many products there. There are women-owned products, whether it be wine or, because I love wine, I say that anytime I get an opportunity. Shoes, anything that is, created by a woman. Why aren't we all in holistically? That's what I feel like is just now starting to come to women's sports, and it to me it's like a no-brainer.
I know. It's always been mind-boggling to me.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Well, to double down on what you're saying is what is often known about these, emerging markets is there's potential for exponential growth. The market that is now women's sport in multiple leagues is as if you don't invest in Bitcoin 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. There is such an opportunity here for your traditional business, but also your women-owned business to really get in to storytell and tell a narrative that transcends not just the sport that these women play, but to really touch the soul and skin of the women that have used their products, have been introduced to their products, and that value what being a professional athlete now means in today's culture and society.
So let's get a little bit deeper into the ecosystem. So coming up on 4 years since we made our 50-50 pledge that for every dollar we spent in men's sports media, we were going to match that dollar for dollar in women's sports.
Let's go!
I know, and it's been literally the best thing we've ever done for our business, bar none. And no other brand has made that pledge since. And I think one of the things, just saying.
We're very proud of them.
There you have it. But we have seen, I think, new ecosystems being built in the women's sports world, and we've been very intentional about building our portfolio. NWSL, WNBA, the Las Vegas Aces, let's go Aces, take one tonight, go up 3.
You're in New York Liberty world. That's really dangerous to say.
I know. But the other thing is Unrivaled. And we came in as a founding partner of Unrivaled, and one of the things I love about Unrivaled is that they've built a completely different ecosystem that doesn't exist in any sport, men's or women's. And so, Cari, I know that you're a big fan.
I love Unrivaled.
And I would love to hear your perspective on Unrivaled and why you think it's such a different model that's going to really change the way that leagues have to behave.
Sweat equity. They have built a brand that says we invest in you as the talent that keeps it going, as the players that keeps this going, and we want you to have an investment in it. We work harder when it belongs to us, right? When there's an ownership, and I think Unrivaled has put together one of the first professional leagues where the players feel ownership, they feel investment. And look, it's not to say that it's always going to be perfect, but when you take 2 players and they decide to create a league based on the things that they are missing in their professional league, you're going to have a lot of wins. And I think what Unrivaled has done has shown that what can be the possibility. These women are out here working hard, and I am old enough to remember, and I was on a panel earlier today, I would interview players and I would ask them, women specifically, what are you going to do after you retire? Because they weren't paid enough and they needed to have another job and they needed to have a pivot, and it was imperative. Not because they just wanted to pivot, they had no choice. I can name some players that are who are soaring right now, who have been making tons of money with this resurgence, if you will. But I feel like what Unrivaled did, and congratulations to them, is they understood that if you put the player, the person who is doing that hard work, that sweat equity, and you put them in a place where they feel that they are invested in and they matter, they'll work harder, the product will be better, and people will come and they'll want to be a part of it. And they've done that so well, at least in my opinion.
They've done an amazing job. And in the economic trajectory that they're creating for those players, it's just such a different model, and I think it's going to put a different kind of pressure on every league to figure out why they can't, kind of come up with the same type of system. Mayor, this is something you and I have spent many nights talking about. Speaking
Over
of
wine.
many nights till like 2 o'clock in the morning drinking wine, and there might have been a little bit of tequila in there somewhere too.
Headaches for sure.
But just this notion of how female athletes have really transcended culture and their cultural currency. And I think in many regards how that cultural currency is even bigger than male athletes. One, why have female athletes had to do that? And two, how do you think that brands should think about intersecting that cultural currency and helping accelerate that for female athletes?
Yeah, I think it's been a massive movement towards having more cultural moments where there are multiple touch points between athletes and culture and what that looks like. Is it fashion? Is it TV? Is it movie? Is it these things where you can get an appetite for this player on a more consistent basis? And can these things, which I think when you think a lot about the women, when you think Alex Morgan comes to mind, Asia Wilson, Caitlin Clark, all these players that have been able to really transcend culture, what they ultimately are able to do is really sit in an authentic space with themselves. And so what they are able to provide to the fan, to the viewer, is a sense of proximity to their life that they value. And when you are given that in an authentic way and you continue to build your brand around these moments that intersect with your life naturally and that matter to you and are causes that matter to you, ultimately you tell your fan or your audience that it should also matter to you. And the more that they're seen in these environments, the more it grows the game, the more it grows the viewership, the more it grows for everyone else to take part in something that is definitely built by players' names and recognitions in these multifaceted ways.
I used to say this to Mayor. I wanted her to be the face of Prada or Chanel or one of these brands because she was
Same,
so...
Cari.
Is anyone here?
You're out there,
Can
Chanel.
someone make this happen?
I mean, look at the outfit. It should, right?
And like, she's so fashionable, and there are these, and that's her authentic self. Before we were doing the tunnel walks with the players, and it was seen on ESPN and all these other different outlets, I was like, what a huge miss for some of these clothing brands not to highlight more athletes, because there are women here who that is their desire. That is something else they would be doing outside of playing sport, and that's an authentic space. I often wonder why it takes so long, because the same things, like you mentioned Angel Reese, the reason why she's so popular now is because she is her authentic self. But there was a time when they said she was too much, she was too loud, she was this, she was that, the two of it all. But all of that, she leaned into that, and the brands found her, and it made sense, and the fans loved her because of that. And that's what I would like to encourage more of when I talk to athletes. I remember Adam Silver saying, we're looking for, and this was, heaven forbid, he was like, I like the Serena Williams of it all. Like, this is when Serena was playing and she was at the height of her career. He was like, it would be nice to have a WNBA player who had that same vibe. And I was like, I don't know if they felt safe enough to be a Serena.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
But all the while, the formula was there, the recipe was there. Just lean into yourself.
Well, and the reality too is so many of these female athletes, because they weren't getting paid on the court or on the field what they needed to, they had to monetize through their social currency, and that became their cultural currency. And I think as female athletes, they just had to create that for themselves as a way to, put food on the table. But it turned into something that's, I think, really sustainable and something really special about women's sports.
Or, Andrea, they get avocados.
Nothing wrong with a good avocado.
Here's your avocado.
All right, so we talk about this all the time. People say, oh, women's sports is having a moment. I don't really think it's having a moment.
Yeah.
I think that's actually insulting. I do think it's a movement, and I think it's a growing movement. How do we all together as athletes and broadcasters and brands and fans make sure that this ecosystem stays strong and resilient?
I think we lean into it, just similar to what I was saying. I think that the more that we support, I find that in my world, my best is to be as honest as I can be when telling these stories, and not sugarcoating and not being politically correct, because I don't think that we live in a world that wants that. We talk about authenticity. We need to be able to tell the black and the white of these stories and lean into why they feel complicated and uncomfortable, because at the end of the day, the world that we now know only gives you your opinion. No one wants to hear the PC version of it. You just don't. So for me, in my world, I want to know more about the athletes and their complicated decisions. Most recently, what's going on in the WNBA and Nafisa Collier. How many fans did she gather? Because she leaned into telling a very truthful story that people were afraid to say, using her words most professionally and also having receipts. And people were like, well, there you go. I'm interested. I want more. I'm going to follow this story. I do believe we're just built that way as humans. We're naturally curious about how this world works, what's happening behind the scenes. And for me, that's what I hope to do in a way that elevates the league and these players, and it gives them the story that they need to be told.
Yeah. Mayor, would you add on to that?
I love this question because I am approaching a year since my retirement date, and I have entered into this world of figuring out what all of this looks like post my playing career. And I think what I've realized is that in order to move all of this forward, it requires me to be able to show up as the passionate person I was when I was playing the game, that I genuinely care about the growth of women's sports, the growth of the NWSL. And when you kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it all, and I've seen it from a player side, and now I see it from the business side, and there is a massive gap between league, player, league, brand, and I think for me, it's figuring out what are those conversations, who are those people that you need to start bringing in to really start closing the delta between the gap that you see between these leagues and the ability to highlight the players in them. And the more that we can tell these stories, the more that we can show these athletes in a way that, again, is giving you an authentic view of the good and the bad of it all, and having a voice that is true and that is positive but is able to critique and really propel this game forward, because all you're getting now is more eyeballs. Broadcast deals are bigger than they've ever been, and it is imperative that you continue to tell these stories of the athlete by the people that very much care about the particular athlete we are telling these stories about. So for me, I think there's a lot of opportunity to really sit in these very cool spaces and continue to push the narrative, given my experience as a professional athlete and knowing that is a unique experience. And for a lot of players, that experience has not changed drastically that much from 2013 till now. And I say that in the upper echelon of players, the players that have broken through that barrier, that is where we have seen exponential amounts of growth. And that is wonderful. I think there's a massive amount of opportunity just below that to really find the women with these compelling stories and continue to bring life to them, to only elevate all of it, which is the league, which is the players within it. And yeah, I feel very passionate about it. I'm very excited about what the future can be within this space.
Yeah, well, I can tell you from a brand perspective, look, the value is absolutely there. The 2 years after we made the 50-50 pledge, our brand valuation went up 37%.
Wow.
And the financial services category dropped in terms of brand valuation. I talked about 65% of all of the traffic coming to our storefront is from women. I talked about the favorability. So look, it absolutely is a great place to invest. And it's been a lot of fun talking with you guys here today. And we're running a tight ship. We're going to finish right on time. I appreciate you guys being here. Appreciate Tech Futures having us. Cari, Mayor, it's been awesome. Thank you guys for
You
joining.
did a great job. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys.
Thank you.